We're here with Darryl McAllister, former police chief, retired, now an executive with Pixar Security, on our podcast. You know, Darryl, we've been talking for a while now. I've been so interested and fascinated with your personal background, personal story, but your experience in policing and the topics that we both have a shared interest in, police reform, and really helping the national conversation in this regard. So I wanted to have you on our podcast and learn more about you, what you've done personally in your career, what you feel some of the directions are that can be taken in this conversation, and we'll go from there. But for now, welcome to our podcast, Darryl McAllister. Tell us about your background.
Thank you, Shahryar. I'm very, very, very happy to be part of this. The word that you mentioned 2 or 3 times in that introduction is the word conversation. And I can't even begin to capture how important that simple word is when it comes to dealing with issues where people are so unfamiliar with each other, issues where there's so much fear, issues where there's so much lack of dialogue. Conversation is really important. That's one of the things that attracted me to doing this. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, I had a long policing career, and it in some senses it's really not over. But yeah, it was more than just a job for me. I mean, I was called to this. It was. I knew ever since I was an 8-year-old kid that being a police officer was something I wanted to do. And I was, fortunate in life to have that become a reality. I spent 37 years in police work in the San Francisco Bay Area, in the East Bay, 32 years in a city of about 250,000 people or so, 260,000 people. And in the last 5 years, I migrated right next door to a slightly smaller city, about 80,000 or so people, to wrap up the last 5 years of my career as a chief of police. Storied career, but I didn't just do that career, I lived it. And having lived that career and seen all of the highest highs and the lowest lows really kind of fed my passion about just how much influence the police have and how much influence a community can have when really good, cohesive communication, conversation, familiarity, building of relationships can happen. And so that was kind of the driving force of my entire career. I retired just under 3 years ago, at the end of 2018, but I feel so passionately about the work that I've continued to do some things to keep that conversation going. Not only do I lead various forms of training across the state, trying to help, in particular, aspiring and newly appointed chiefs of police to be successful, especially in today's really, really strident need for conversation, but just because I have such a love and a passion and an ability to see this work and see the confluence of all the issues involving policing through so many lenses, as a Black man, as a father of 3 Black children, one of whom is incarcerated, as a career dedicated, devoted police professional. So I have this unique set of lenses that I'm able to look at issues through, and it's really helped with my kind of my quest, my desire, my hunger to help contribute to that conversation you were talking about.
Right. Thank you, Darryl, for that background. As I said, we've been talking about this for some time now, and my interest being an expatriate, I wasn't born here. I came here and I brought my own cultural baggage from my own homeland in Iran about policing and law enforcement. So I'm going to ask you about the implications of race and policing a little bit. But before I do, I wanted to kind of kind of put three buckets in front of you and ask your opinion about this. So in my observation as someone that arrived here 42 years ago, and when I look at policing, I see three different buckets. I see multicultural lens, as you mentioned, so people that were born here, so they bring their own law enforcement identities here. Then you mentioned the African American experience. That is another lens. And then the white America experience. So these three buckets, multicultural, African American, and the white experience, they all look at policing a little differently, it seems to me, in my observation. So I'm curious how you feel race plays a part in policing, knowing about, there's probably more buckets. I'm oversimplifying. There's several buckets, but I'm just focusing on race and background and your experience with policing.
Well, I think it's important first to realize that the world of policing is frankly a microcosm of our larger society, kind of wrapped within the confines of authority and professionalism, and huge amounts of discretion within those confines of authority. Right. And a mission to bring safety and protection and compliance and social order and all those kinds of things to the society to which we all belong. When we think about our American society's history, both the pretty and the ugly, right? The values, both the altruistic and the indifferent, the morals, both the esteemed and the disgraceful. Maybe even the degrees of health, both physical and mental, and there's so much stuff in there that are human traits that you're either brought into the policing profession when we arrive, or they're kind of awakened as we progress in this profession. And even we, even though we have, in our leadership approach, we do our best to kind of measure and screen the personalities and the traits of the people who become part of this. We don't often admit that we're a microcosm of the same community that we're recruiting from.
Right.
So in my view, for any of us in this policing profession, to say that racism, for example, at its worst, or bias at its best, is not an element of some of our failures would be as ludicrous, right, as if anyone would say that there's no honor or nobleness in the work that we do. Right. We do our best to keep these biases and these fears in check with all kinds of processes and policies and practices, and influential leadership. But communities and the people who serve as police in those communities, when they don't know each other well, it breeds as a haven for distrust and biases and unfamiliarity and fear. And fear is powerful. Let me just real quick here. Sure. I never really explicitly viewed myself as a Black police officer. Hmm. I mean, in jest, I'll say that, I've been Black all my life. And I honorably served as a police officer for 37 years of that life. So at times I understood myself to be a Black man who happened to be a police officer. And at other times, depending on my thought or the circumstances in the moment of time, I viewed myself as a police officer who happened to be Black. Most of the time, I just saw myself as a cop, plain and simple. Right. The issues of race and policing are very difficult conversations to have. Right. If there's a peeling back of the onion layers in that conversation. Shariar, there have been times when, I'm just being real here. Yeah. There have been times when I have boldly spoke out about race issues when I was having conversation maybe with my colleagues, or and there were times when I admittedly didn't feel that I had the desire nor the energy to get into this polluted, these provocative topics. And likewise, there's been times at home, even, especially during the holidays, around holiday dinner, when I was ready to get into that spirited debate about police and race. But I'd be lying if I tell you there were times when I just wasn't in the mood to talk police in a room full of family members.
Right.
We all tend to look through our own individual lenses whenever we consider things that we're emotional about.
Yeah.
Or invested in.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. I mean, and I think as I look at those two words together, race and policing, we're talking about race and policing because that seems to come up more. It's in the media. Maybe there's race and accountants, or race and car. I mean, maybe there's some other profession that race plays. Obviously, redlining and the practice of real estate and loan and mortgages was an issue. Still is probably in this country. It's illegal. So race does play a role in real estate and mortgages and lending and fair labor, everything, fair loan practices. But it's not in the front and as direct and as immediate and as shocking as observing, whether race was the issue or not, observing a black man being arrested or hit by a white officer. Those things are shocking, as you say, and they're part of, like you said, the microcosm of America, whether you like it or not. We're all of this thing. We can't say we're just the good parts or the bad, but we're all of this thing. And we need to have those tough conversations, as you laid out well in the beginning. But so when you look at race and policing, is the problem just a few bad apples? Because that's usually the response some police organizations or labor unions give. They say, oh, it's just that one guy. The other 99% are good people. And I don't doubt that perception or that logic, because like you say, I don't believe, that everybody's bad, right? I don't go around saying everybody's bad, everybody's prejudiced. But that can't always be the answer, is it? Is that the right answer?
No, that's not always the right answer. I never have, and I never would suggest that we, when I say we, I'm referring to collectively kind of as we, the police.
Sure.
I've never suggested that we are all bad.
Yeah.
If that's the takeaway, then I'm being grossly misunderstood.
Yeah.
We, those of us in the police profession, we're not all bad.
Right.
In fact, I frustratingly asked many times, where is the acknowledgement of the good people in law enforcement, the vast majority of law enforcement who are trying so hard? In my view, we are kind of way beyond the one bad apple spoils the barrel mentality in terms of what's driving our desperately needed change of focus. In the eyes of kind of a huge swath of this country's population, a police officer, for example, kneeling on the neck of a man until the man's last breath, all the while resting his hands in his pockets while as that man begs to be allowed to breathe. That's not widely perceived as a bad apple.
Yeah.
People are scared.
Yeah.
People are angry. Many people instead they see that image, and I'm using that as an example, but they see that image as a representation of who we are as a whole, and that deep-seated kind of systematic problems of a profession with a kind of a long checkered history of both triumphs and injustices, the injustices being the indelible part. It really doesn't matter how much we know that and I'm talking about the police, know that these kinds of incidents are not nearly as pervasive as people fear.
Yeah.
And certainly not an indication of what we, kind of proudly believe ourselves and our integrity to be. The fear that people feel is powerful, even if it doesn't align with what we know ourselves to be. It's just time that we, the police, take a deeper, broader, kind of more courageous, introspective look at the barrel.
Yeah.
That we've been using since the beginning of law enforcement. Everybody who's taken law enforcement classes has learned about the beginning of policing and Sir Robert Peel and all this Vollmer and all these old pioneers. None of them, in my view, would suggest that if they were transplanted into current time, would suggest that this would be kind of a bad apples example or argument. They wouldn't do it as a way to kind of close this craters divide. This is not simple. It's not superficial. The issues that we face. I argue that the solutions that we embrace, they have to have deep, broad conversation and accompanied with huge levels of humility as we try to navigate through this. But the bad apple knows we got to work on the barrel.
Yeah. That's a good point. As you're speaking about, the bad apples and the visual that you were describing with the Chauvin case, I think another topic, there's no shortage of topics to discuss, but another topic is really policing in the age of social media. Because when you say these issues are not pervasive, people would probably strongly disagree because they think it is, because they keep seeing it over and over again on social media with infuriating commentaries. So that's different than news. That's different than just seeing a picture or video of it. So it's the visual, the commentary, and immediately the politicization of, see, this is what's wrong with America. The left allowed this, the right allowed this, and here we are. We won't get it. I won't open that political can of worms right now. But I did want to ask you about, your experience as a Black police officer. Sometimes when I look at some of these issues online, I see Black police chiefs that have problems, it seems like, in their department. So, I wonder, not only your experience as a Black police officer, but your experience as a Black police chief. How were you how did you deal with all this stuff?
Well, I mean, internally, inside your own organization as a leader, I think your credibility and the thrust or the power of or the influence of your leadership is really based on integrity and based on your track record and your level of candor and honesty, and the degree to which the men and women who serve under your leadership believe and trust in you, regardless of what you look like and regardless of what your background was or is. And I think sometimes, even like in recruiting of police chiefs or the appointing of leaders, sometimes that can get lost in the shuffle. Oh, we have a Black candidate, let's just go ahead and plug him in there. You still got to have all the integrity. You still got to build the relationships. You still have to be believable among the people you lead in order for them to all row in the direction that they need to be rowing under that leadership. So that's one thing. So I've always been very, very honest, open, very transparent in my leadership, and it's always been very, very effective and influential for that matter. So that is one piece over here. As far as the visual piece, the sometimes symbolic piece in terms of what is the percentage of Black police officers, or what is the percentage of Black chiefs or whatever, that's a different issue. I mean, many people don't know that in the state of California, there are 334 municipal police chiefs in California. When I retired, 16 were African American.
Wow.
Of those 334 in the state of California.
16 police chiefs.
16 police chiefs of the 334 in
34.
California when I retired are black.
Okay. Wow.
So that kind of, well, oh man, what does that mean? Well, it can mean a lot of things, but it also is kind of an underscore of on the whether you want to call it symbolism side or whatever, how we've got some things to do. Now, there's a dynamic that I want to just touch on in this area called black and blue. That is being a police officer of color, predominantly black, while wearing a blue uniform. And it's a phenomenon. And it starts to unveil kind of the inherent conflicts that are said to be at issue as it pertains to race and policing, but on the inside of policing. You know, last year, for example, not too long after we all watched what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd, I was invited to join a handful of other Black police leaders to address an organized gathering right here in California, Northern California, in the East Bay. It was about 150 random Black police officers from numerous agencies in the Bay Area. And they were all kind of just walking around like zombies. And this had been arranged, even in the height of COVID, we were able to find a place for these officers to kind of come together. And about another 100 or so even joined by Zoom during the time that these other Black police leaders and I addressed this group of Black and blue, because they were dealing with the dichotomies of race like never before as this was unfolding across our country. I have never been at any police-centric activity like this where grown men and women, some in uniform, literally cried with emotion as they shared their struggles between loyalties to family, their social world, and their work. I was just reading just a few months ago an article that quoted a Black police officer in Miami, or North Miami, I think it was, who said, not in a million years would he ever have thought that things would come to what they come to. It's very hard. He said, it's very hard for cops of color right now. It's almost like I'm loyally represent two different groups that are at odds with each other. So there's that dynamic too. There's that mental health dynamic inside of departments, and skyrocketing suicide rates, and all these things are happening amidst this turmoil. So the idea of being Black and wearing blue and being a leader, a Black police leader, a police chief, it has its own dynamics, as you suggest. And I don't have the magic pixie dust for that, other than the fact that we need to be aware of it. So as we engage in these conversations we're talking about, we have that level of awareness that there's more than what's on the surface in dealing with the issues that we're dealing with within our organizations and within our local communities.
As you were explaining that dynamic, I was thinking about all the complexities of human emotion that would come into play to any human being in that role. It is, it could be overwhelming. I mean, there is a high suicide rate. You have, as a Black leader, I'm sure you felt compelled to go out, march in a BLM march as you're being asked to protect, the public from, any problems that may arise from that. What kind of example are you setting for your officers? How do you not alienate the white officers or the Black? I mean, just the list of issues, and then it just goes on and forever, without, like you say, no magic solution to just, other than recognizing the difficult conversation you need to have constantly to be able to supplement and cultivate a positive environment. We've talked about, when you're a special needs parent like me, I always say, I don't pray for a cure. I pray for strength. Mm-hmm. That day, some days it comes, some days it doesn't. But when you pray for a cure that never comes, that's just a waste of time. That just doesn't, it's not constructive. But when you are focused on your strengths and cultivating an environment where your strengths can thrive, where you can be strong in dealing with your problems, not admitting they don't exist, not admitting they're not as bad, but confronting your problems, you have a more sustainable culture, whether it's policing or some other environment where you have incredibly difficult life-threatening issues to deal with. Talking about that, the other visual image, that comes to mind, because police deal with life and protecting life, the physical restraints that most people find infuriating, or some people do, I don't know what the number is national, whether it was the kneeling on the necks or the chokehold that Eric Gardner, I believe, was involved in, how has that evolved in policing?
Well, as we know, especially in recent years, the last few years, many of those tactics or techniques have been controlled through legislation, really.
Right.
But even though we, as a society, have been finding the need to bring about compliance and transparency, or compliance at least through legislating it, it goes so far beyond that. There's so much more contribution to the lack of or presence of trust beyond whether or not a law enforcement agency's officers are in compliance with some law that says you cannot use this particular tactic. There's just common sense in some of this stuff. Yeah. Clearly, as we saw last year, there is no trained practice of kneeling on someone's neck at any police department I've ever seen.
For 8 minutes, for 9 minutes.
It's just not something that was taught, but it happened.
Yeah.
And we hear about chokeholds and what we call carotid restraints, and how those are being outlawed in many states by legislatures because of the not only the symbolic part about it, because frankly, I'll just put it out there, Black men have been choked to death for 400 years.
Yeah.
And so there's that piece of that as well.
Right.
So I do believe that the legislation that we are all seeing, I mean, it was to be expected in the first place. Yeah. The degree to which it's necessary, I think, plays a big part on the level of trust there is to begin with in a particular community. Right.
No, you're right. I mean, it seems like politicians are reacting, obviously, to the public sentiment. As I saw those legislations coming through about the carotid restraints or the knee constraints, frankly, having so many police officer friends and being a public servant for as long as I was, 25 years, working with cops in many capacities, I felt, oh my God, you got to deal with somebody out of control, and now you have to go through your head, oh no, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't, it just sounds crazy. It sounds completely illogical to me to take away the officers' every ounce of ability and obviously foresight and training and advantage to quickly control a situation for the good of not only their own safety and their fellow officer, but the public and even the individual. So personally, I understand the legislative logic, the political logic. I can't say I don't like restraining good police officers and giving them every advantage to save a life. That seems crazy to me. I'm sorry. Let me put that out there. That seems crazy to me.
I could not agree more with you.
Yeah.
Sharia, I could not agree more with you. You can't legislate trust. I mean, that's the smallest, that's the most succinct statement I can make about what you
Yeah.
just said. You
Right.
cannot legislate
Right.
trust.
Right.
You can legislate compliance
Right.
based upon law, but you cannot legislate trust. Trust is built through relationships. It's built
Right.
through conversations.
Right.
Now, you're talking kind of in the area of reform here, and a lot of people don't realize, the demands for police reform, they've been in high gear for several years now,
Yeah.
at least
Yeah.
here in California. I mean, in 2015, for example, Assembly Bill, 953, which is known as the Racial and Identity Profiling Act, RIPA is what we call it for short, made it a requirement for all law enforcement agencies in the state of California to collect and report stop data, the racial makeup of everyone who is stopped by the police in traffic stops, pedestrian stops. And it also created the RIPA board that helps eliminate racial and identity profiling and improve diversity and eliminate that profiling and do evidence-based research and so on. And then in 2018, there was another Assembly Bill 1421 that forced California law enforcement to be more transparent by public reporting uses of force and sustained findings in conduct investigations. And then just in 2019, a couple years ago, it was Assembly Bill 392 and Senate Bill 230. They were tied together and both became law together that changed the legal standard for the use of deadly force and requires all law enforcement agencies to have specific policies addressing deadly force and it changed the force standard and the training requirements. I was honored last year, as a matter of fact. I was selected as a co-facilitator on the task force that the state formed after the passage of AB 392 to develop comprehensive guidelines that every police agency in California needs to follow to be in compliance with the new law. It took us 6 months. The task force included, civil rights advocates, attorneys from the ACLU, law enforcement, subject matter experts, DOJ attorneys, RIPA board members. It was a pretty dynamic room that we were facilitating. And it took us 6 months, but we were able to come to consensus in a room with so much divergent backgrounds. And the irony is, and just a personal note for me, we were holding at least some of these meetings at a meeting room at the county jail facility where 300 yards up the path, my son sits in a cell. It was a really weird experience for me.
Right.
And if your listeners would like to read those guidelines that all law enforcement in California has to abide by, it's easy. All they got to do is just go to post.ca.gov and just click on the publications tab and they'll see it right there.
I will have it on the bottom of our post. Darryl McAllister, this has been profoundly insightful and compelling and important and timely. This conversation with you, I feel just a little bit smarter and wiser just listening to you and hearing your experiences. I know we are going to make this kind of a longer conversation. There's so much to talk about when we talk about policing in America, from technology and drones to gender issues and there's social equity issues. There's a lot to talk about, and I'm excited that we've made this connection. I'm excited to hear your thoughts, your personal compelling experiences, and I want to continue this conversation over the coming year if you'll have me.
Absolutely, it's absolutely my pleasure, and as we started this conversation, and that's the pivotal word there. I guess if there's two takeaways that I would like for your audience to have from this particular conversation, is that word conversation and how important and powerful it is. That one piece, and the other piece is just the notion that we can legislate compliance, but we cannot legislate trust.
Right.
It has to be done through relationships. Has to be.
Well said. Well said, my friend. Darryl McAllister, thank you so much for spending this time with me. We'll talk soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.